Here we have geography now, Brazil, which I would say is one of the bigger, probably one of the more popular countries when it comes to people saying, oh, I can't wait till you get to this or get to that. I would say Brazil is a very interesting one. It's a very large country, it's Portuguese. That's really interesting. There's a history of colonialism. Any sort of colonialism makes geography more complicated, which inherently makes it more fun. So there you go. That should be a good time. Uh, I don't know what else there is to really say there. I don't know a ton about Brazil. I remember doing a project on Brazil in, I don't know, middle school or something. It was probably eighth grade. And I remember I made their flag out of clay. It's a good time. My teachers were very proud of me. However, it I don't know if I necessarily learned a ton from that project. I was a bad student until like 3 years ago, maybe. I was just coasting up until a few years ago. Now I'm actually a half decent student. So I wish I tried harder earlier on. That I wouldn't need all these reviews. But this is a review for me. I get to learn some stuff that I may have known at some point or another. We shall find out. Let's get started. Oh, sorry, I missed. There we go.
Hey Geography peeps, so
started.
Brazil is one of the largest countries in the world. Obviously, I won't be able to cover everything within about 10 minutes. I'll try to do my best, but in the meantime, soccer, monkeys, Amazon, Ronaldo, and samba songs, capoeira, anacondas, carnaval, and attractive people that kind of have like tan skin. Oh, come on guys, you knew that was coming.
No, I did not. What was that? The didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turned. That must be what he's doing there.
Time to learn geography now!
Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbie.
Like, if he did this today, it would probably be at least a 30-minute video. I've seen some of the newer videos. I've not actually watched them, but I see him putting them out because I am subscribed. And they're all like twice as long at least.
I guess that's a thing now. And after weeks of anticipation, we finally finished the Brazil video. And you know how we start these things. Let's dissect the flag.
Hell yeah. This one was probably a lot of
Brazil
work.
has a green field with a yellow rhombus in the middle and a blue disc in the center with 27 stars scattered throughout the disc and the country's motto depicted on a white band sprawled across the blue disc. Some people might tell you that the green represents forests and yellow represents gold, but yeah, that's not really true. The green and yellow are actually inspired from the former imperial flag of Brazil, which was derived from two royal households, the green representing the House of Braganza for King Dom Pedro I, and the yellow for the House of Habsburg that his wife Maria Leopoldina came from. The blue disc and the stars are what make up the most fun part of this flag. Each star represents one of the 27 states of Brazil. Furthermore, they are all separated.
Oh, they have the same thing the United States has. That's kind of cool. So if like if they for some reason acquired another state through some sort of imperial coincidence, we'll call it that. Would they have to? They would have to add another state. I mean, another star. Because I'd assume in the United States, when we add new states, which we've done throughout our entire history, and we might add more in my lifetime. We have to add a new star. The next version of the flag is already made. We're waiting for that 51st state, whether it be Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C. or Guam. We have that figured out. We're going to fit that next star in. So I'm curious if Brazil would do that. I don't know what the modern day politics of Brazil is. I don't know how imperialistic they could get today. I don't want to underestimate or overestimate their ability to do so.
Separated into 9 different constellations that you can typically see in the southern hemisphere. Straddling.
I know it won't be Guam. It's just something I'm just trying to think of territories. It definitely won't be Guam. Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C. We'll see what gets the most. But both have a little bit of support behind them. Who knows when that vote will end up happening, but probably in my lifetime we'll see at least one of them incorporated.
Across the blue disc is a banner with the country's motto, Ordem e Progresso, which means order and progress. A flag with stars representing each state in the country. Ah, Brazil, I think there's some people that can gel well with that. Now here's where things get a little fun, because each section of Brazil kind of has its own little story. But first, Brazil is the largest country in the South American continent. If you grew up in Latin America, you would have been told that both South and North America are together one continent, but for pragmatic definitional reasons, we're just going to treat South America as a separate entity, as its own continent. Brazil...
Yeah, like, continents are whatever you want to make of them. The only reason that we divide North and South America is just to have the definitions a little bit more specific, because there's so much different about what's going on up at the top as opposed to what's going on down at the bottom. It's such a large umbrella that it's not particularly useful in a lot of ways. I'll say the Americas if I'm referring to the whole thing, which occasionally I do, but I find it more practical to divide the two because it gives you something bigger than countries, but a little bit more narrow than this entire landmass, which is a lot to group into one big thing.
But for pragmatic definitional reasons, we're just going to treat South America as a separate entity, as its own continent. Brazil's domain stretches all the way from the Atlantic coast and deep into the interior of the continent. Brazil is bordered by every single South American country except for Ecuador and Chile. You could also technically say that Brazil borders France. Why? Because
French
this little guy,
Guiana.
French Guiana. That's right, this is not a country, but rather an overseas territory of France. It's okay, raise your hand if you just learned that. You're learning. The country's capital is the aptly named Brasilia, located slightly inland in the central west region of Brazil, and actually administers itself in its own federal district, much like Washington, D.C. Brasilia was actually built in 1960 as they were
sick,
switching
we're so
from the old
similar.
capital, Rio de Janeiro. That's right, it's pronounced Rio de Janeiro, not Rio de Janeiro. Get it right, we're not in Mexico. This is Portuguese, not Spanish. This was done in an attempt to provide a more regional neutrality for the rest of the states in Brazil by centralizing the capital. Brazil is divided into 27 federative units, 26 of which are states, and one federal district, which is where the capital resides. Each state and
Brazil has a longer border with France than any country in Europe. Oh yeah, that's weird. That is weird, but yeah, that's so strange. I know sometimes when I talk to people, they kind of downplay French Guiana as just being like an extension of France, and I think that might be a little bit oversimplified, because there's got to be plenty of difference between mainland France and French Guiana, so the distinction is absolutely necessary. But if you want to be super literal about it, absolutely, yeah, it would be the longest border.
and region of Brazil has their own unique flavor that they bring to the table, and we'll discuss more about that in the demographics, but essentially it kind of goes like this. We grow food. We got all the money. We are so black. We are so white. Stop cutting our trees. In terms of disputes, Brazil has 2 disputed areas with Bolivia on the Mamoré River and 2 disputed areas with Uruguay on the Uruguay River and in the Masoyera Rivera that nobody cares about. Funny backstory, Uruguay actually used to be part of Brazil, known as the Cisplatina province, yada yada yada. There was a war, they gained their independence. Brazil has a ton of islands off their coast, but the furthest reaches of the Brazilian domain would have to be the 4 island and archipelago chains in the Atlantic: Fernando de Noronha, the Rocas Atoll, the St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks, which is a non-permanent residence science lab station, and Trindade and Martin Vaz. Otherwise,
I can't even see them on my map.
Borders look kind of funny. If you look at the map, it kind of looks like Brazil has river Tourette syndrome, in which they have a lot of half rivers, but then they jump onto the next adjacent river, which is like a couple hundred kilometers away. It's like, I'll take part of the Rio Acre, but then, I'll cut through and make my way over to the Rio Puros. I'll take the Rio Santa Rosa, but then, I'll jump over to Rio Breu. This all had to do with centuries of disputes with the former empires, and today you have this massive piece of sovereign complexity. And that's just the borders. Wait till you see what's inside the borders. When you think of Brazil, everybody just kind of automatically defaults to
Tectonic
one image,
plates?
the Amazon. And yes, the Amazon is a very imperative factor to the nation's domain. However, there's a lot more to it in terms of landscape and terrain. First of all, about 60% of the entire Amazon rainforest is located in Brazil, mostly in the north region, and of course, no surprise, consists of the most heavily compact ecoregion on Earth. Out of all the 10 million species of animals and insects known to human beings, about half
You're
of them
one
called
of those. You're not the same kind, but you're like one of those things.
the Amazon rainforest home.
You're
Many
a
of the
flying
species that have
dinosaur.
yet to be discovered are still lingering about in the deep, uncharted depths of the Amazon today. Now, we all know that there's a huge deforestation
French Guiana is like our Alaska. You know what? That you just made it very relatable to me. That makes a lot of sense.
problem going on in Brazil in the Amazon to provide more agricultural land. However, even Brazil's own citizens are harshly criticizing the action. It's a little tricky though, because with Brazil's rapidly growing population, more resources are demanded of the people. So it's kind of like, we get it, it's bad, but I mean, what do you want us to do? Our country is growing and we need to provide you people with more stuff. Use alternative methods! Like what? We're working on it! Otherwise, outside of the Amazon, the rest of the country has a
be
vast
that
array
way
of
sometimes.
contrasting scenery almost equally as fascinating. Along the coast, you have the Mata Atlântica, or the Atlantic Forest, the Cerrado, or the tropical savannas in the center. This is also the area where most farms and ranches can be found. Also, keep in mind, Brazil is one of the top countries in meat production and exports. In the south, you have the Araucaria, or the pine evergreen
tired.
forests. In the north, you have the small mountains,
Not bored,
especially
just
close to
tired.
the border of Venezuela, in which you can find one of the most notable natural landmarks being the tri-point border between Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil, Mount Roraima, even though Brazil only owns about 5% of the mountain. But still,
Don't even trip about it, Austin. Sorry, I just had to. Don't even trip about it, Austin. You do you. You know, pull yourself together. You know, do your best for you. Don't worry about attending the stream. That's what the VOD's for. Like, and I hope the best for you, and I hope you feel better, because I know that stuff can be really rough.
it counts. Roraima is one of the strangest looking flat-top plateau mountains with vertical cliffs almost perpendicular to the ground, earning it the label as one of the hardest mountains to climb. Fun side note, Mount
Sick.
Roraima was one of the areas that inspired the scenery for the Pixar movie Up, which is a great movie. By the way, go ahead, watch it.
I
And
actually
with
haven't
that said,
seen it.
Pixar and Disney, you can't sue me for copyright infringement rights for using a clip of your movie in my corner box here, because in accordance with fair use limitation rights, I commented and gave a critique on your material. Just letting you know, you can't sue me. One of the most remarkably bizarre and unusual spots of the country, though, would have to be the
Gotta do
famous
your best
flooded
to
deserts of Lençóis
make it
Paranenses.
clear.
This place, located on the north coast of the Maranhão state, is almost alien-like, as there are virtually no places like it on Earth. Essentially, it's a sand dune desert with abundant lagoons speckled throughout the entire region. Although it gets a lot of rainfall yearly, the area supports little vegetation and wildlife. Nonetheless, the area draws in thousands of tourists yearly, as it contains the almost paradoxical juxtaposition of elements in its scenery. It's not every day that you see a flooded desert. All right, let's talk about the Brazilian people.
Yeah, my favorite. Every week a different segment is my favorite. This week, this is my favorite.
Bolacha, biscoito, bolacha. Yeah, we'll explain what that means in a little bit. But first, now, of course,
Cookies?
Brazil is incredibly diverse, but before we get into that little pie graph thingamajiglet that we always do here in the demographics section, I feel like it's very crucial to mention one important thing about Brazil's people. Now, everybody knows that one of the most dramatically unique traits of Brazil would have to be its people. When asked, what do you think a Brazilian looks like? The stereotype is somebody with a perfectly bronzed, toned body and with slight Germanic features. One reason why this stereotype has been perpetuated so extensively is because, in a strange way, it's kind of true. Over the course of a few hundred years since colonization, Brazil's population has actually virtually invented an entirely new race that never exactly existed before, and it makes up nearly half of the entire population. I'm talking about the Pardo people. Now, although the definition
I will admit, like, I don't want to like stereotype people. Nobody wants to admit to falling for stereotypes, especially of the ethnic variety, but like the image of them is definitely one that independent of it being like actually true, like one that I kind of like totally bought into without having given any context. I just kind of took it at face value. I feel slightly better knowing that it is based on reality, but, you know, you feel weird making assumptions.
Is vague and up for relative dispute. Essentially, this is the easiest way I can describe it. Pardo people are kind of like people that are either too white to be black or too black to be white, and there's probably a little bit of Amerindian in there. That being said, now let's jump into the pie graph. Brazil has about 202 million people, making it the 5th most populous country in the world, right behind Indonesia. About 47% of the people identify as white, about 43%
I didn't know Indonesia was
Pardo,
so high.
about 8% are black, 1.5 Asian, and a very small portion, about 0.5% of the population, are Amerindian. Speaking of Asians, at about 1.5 million strong, Brazil is actually the country with the largest Japanese population outside of Japan. About 70% of whom live in the city of Sao Paulo. Asians have actually historically been migrating to Brazil for centuries. In terms of socio-regional distinctions, Brazil has quite the buffet of ethnic enclaves. For one, you can typically find more black people in the north, and
I find the Asian influence to be kind of strange, given its location. It's not like they're not able to get there, but it's on, I would think a country with more Asian influence would be perhaps on the South American West Coast rather than the East Coast. There's a lot of land to cover to get there. I'd imagine it would be more accessible to the American West Coast, so I'm kind of curious to what actually draws so many people in.
Especially in the Bahia state, where they make up over half of the entire population. This is also the area where you can disputably find some of the best capoeira masters in the world.
Capoeira, dance fighting.
In this area. In the south, and more specifically in the Rio Grande do Sul state, you have one of the largest white populations in the entire country, with immigrants coming from places like Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. In fact, many of these places have remained relatively untouched by the rest of Brazil, and many of the communities still retain the mother language of the country the members of the community came from. Oh, and there's a joke in Brazil that nobody has met anybody from the state of Acre. It's so far and secluded that you may as well just call it North Bolivia. It's mine, Brazil! Nope, too bad. We won it in the war. It's still ours. Deal with it. Then, of course, you have the various native tribal groups. There are about 240 tribes that a little over 900,000 people claim to be a part of ethnically. The government has recognized 690 territories and reservations for these various people groups that make up about 13% of the entire country's landmass, nearly all of it localized in the Amazon rainforest. Brazil's governmental agency for tribal peoples has a list of about 80 uncontacted tribal groups that deliberately choose to remain disconnected from the rest of the world. The governmental agency speculates that there are still many unnamed, undiscovered tribes currently living in the vast, uncharted forests of the Amazon. Culture-wise, it really depends on where you are in Brazil, but everybody knows that Brazil kind of has a very vibrant way that they carry themselves out to the rest of the world. The center of culture, disputably, being Rio de Janeiro, and the economic capital being
Rio de Janeiro.
Most of the population lives within driving distance of the coasts, so there is, in a sense, a prevalent beach culture, especially for the people on the east side of the country. Not everybody in Brazil loves soccer. In fact, many places prefer basketball, and skateboarding has actually been a huge thing that's been exploding over the past few years.
Sick!
And no, not everybody has been to a carnival. Oh, and another thing, there's currently a war going on in Brazil. It's been very brutal. It's been going on for decades, and it's getting quite intense right now. I'm talking about the cookie war. In Brazil, people will ridicule you if you pronounce the word for cookie differently from them, and especially it's a whole Rio versus Sao Paulo thing. People in Sao Paulo will call it bolacha, and the people in Rio will call it biscoito. This conflict has led to the violence.
Sounds like it comes from the word biscuit, but it probably has a different origin that just comes from a similar root. I don't know where the other one could have come from.
Deaths leading in the victimization of people caught in the crossfire, and you almost fell for it, didn't you? Now let's talk about their relationships. Now, Brazil kind of gets along with everyone, but he's kind of like that friend that ventures off and does whatever he wants while you wait in the hallway until he comes back from doing whatever he's doing. First off, pretty much all of their neighbor nations get along with them, although Argentina has a huge competitive hatred for Brazil when it comes to soccer. But all that aside, they have good relations and trade policies. Then, just like mentioned before the Angola video, they get along with other nations of the former Portuguese Empire like Angola, Mozambique, Sao Tome and Principe, Cabo Verde, and so on. They even get along with Portugal and have no bitterness towards the former colonization. Now, when it comes to the US, for centuries they've been good friends and have a deep history of trade and alliances. However, recently Brazil has been kind of diddle-doddling off, making friends with other people that kind of give the US the old shifty eye. Then we have Venezuela and Cuba. Brazil has sided with the Venezuelan government more in the past few decades and has built a $1.5 billion port in Cuba. Then we have Iran. Recently, Brazil has been testing the waters on attempting to build ties with them, although they haven't really improved much recently. Nonetheless, Brazil is quite the popular guy. Not many people dislike Brazil, except for maybe the Brazilians in Brazil that may complain about their own country's administrative affairs, but that's a lesson you'll have to learn by talking to an actual Brazilian person, not me. Plus, we're almost out of time. In conclusion, Brazil is so much more than just the Amazon and soccer, and we didn't even scratch the surface of Brazil in this video. And to find out more, I recommend just talk to a Brazilian. Just remember which side of the cookie you're on.
Yeah,
Stay tuned. Brunei is coming up next.
So while normally we would do 2 countries, I want to save a little bit of time so we can do a little bit of Civ before we wrap up the stream. But I think, given the magnitude of Brazil, I don't mind giving it its own little place in the stream. I really enjoyed that. I think more than any other country, I feel like, and he emphasizes this too, that we hardly scratched the surface on it. Like with a lot of these countries, I didn't know a whole lot about them, and I can't say I know a whole lot about Brazil, but I know there's a lot more than was covered here, and this is where he seemed like he really needed to emphasize that, given when you're talking about a country so culturally unique and big. I think its bigness is definitely a factor there. It's definitely hard to be satisfied with like a 12-minute video on the subject, because yeah, there's definitely so much more there. I really enjoyed that one. I think that was cool. I rarely find a video from him that I don't like, so you know, I don't think I've found one that I didn't like, so I'm pretty happy with it. And he, of course, like, he only improves over time, and I thought this one was a lot of fun. It feels like sometimes visually his camera quality fluctuates. Like, I feel like it was better like a couple videos ago, and then it went back to where it was like a video before that. I don't know, maybe that's all in my head. Am I playing it at max volume? Max quality? I'm not. That was my fault. I was playing it at 480p. Oh, that explains it, why the quality. That was on my end, not even his end.